Sometimes the first language people understand isn't words, it's the way someone chooses not to walk away. Emily was awakened by the sound of hooves. Not one, but dozens. The sound was nothing like a patrol car nor children playing in the dirt. It was heavy, steady, and deliberate, like a silent declaration drawing near. When she stepped onto the porch, at least 20 people stood beyond the weathered wooden fence. They didn't shout. They didn't move forward. They simply stood a line as solid as a mountain. At the center was a man dressed in animal hide wearing a fur headband that made no attempt to hide his graying hair. His eyes were sharp like a hunting knife. Next to him was the boy, same sun-darkened skin, same unspoken gaze. But this time he wore a woven tribal cloak and held a small glimmering stone as if it had been kept safe in someone's pocket for years. Emily didn't know whether to draw her gun or invite them in. She only knew one thing: the boy she had rescued wasn't a lost child. He was the son of a Comanche chief from a tribe that history and government had long declared disbanded. But clearly they had never disappeared. The man stepped forward without introduction or warning. He raised his hand and placed the small stone on her doorstep. "My son," he said in slow, rugged English, "was saved by you, and that cannot be forgotten." Emily froze. Something deep inside her stirred, not from fear, but recognition. In that man's eyes, she saw the same fire she had once seen in her father, a soldier who died protecting a stretch of land no one had bothered to name. "The boy, he doesn't speak," she said softly. "Is he okay?" The chief didn't respond immediately. He looked at his son, then back at her. "He speaks by choosing to return." Then the group, like shadows from a memory history, tried to erase, turned their horses, and rode away. Only the boy stayed. No words. No retreat. Just a gaze choosing to remain with the woman who had once reached out on a morning no one was waiting for. Some encounters are not born of fate, but of the debt of trust shared between those the world once refused to see. The boy never asked Emily's name. He never even spoke to her. But from that morning on, he stayed like the house Emily lived in had always held a quiet space waiting just for him. Emily didn't report it to the police, not because she wanted to hide anything, but because she honestly didn't know what to say. "Hello, Chief. I've been stationed here less than 2 weeks, and this morning a tribe long thought to have vanished brought their son to my doorstep. Maybe as a gift or a message, I'm not really sure." No version of that sounded right. So instead, she brought out an extra blanket, set a glass of milk on the windowsill, and watched the boy draw circles on the wooden floor with charcoal dust, always with his left hand. The circles repeated, calm, steady, never frantic, like a silent ritual performed night after night. Emily wasn't sure if she was raising a child or witnessing a presence awakening one carrying the weight of a culture that had long been stifled. 3 days later, back at the station, a colleague whispered in her ear, "Someone saw you talking to the natives. Be careful. Around here, anything undocumented can be twisted into something criminal." Emily offered only a thin smile. She knew exactly where she was, where the law is spoken aloud, but justice is usually buried in the dirt. The boy, still silent, began waking earlier than she did. Each morning before sunrise, he walked into the woods. When he returned, he always brought something: a piece of bark, a wildflower, sometimes a long jet-black feather, like one left behind by an eagle from some faraway land. Emily didn't ask. She feared breaking the quiet rhythm between them, the only thing that seemed to be keeping him there. But on Saturday evening, as the fire flickered in the old hearth, the boy placed his hand gently on her shoulder and pointed toward the window. There was nothing outside but shadows of trees. But at the doorstep, someone had left a dagger, its handle engraved with silver of a kind, once issued to men who had served in the government campaigns to suppress the Comanche decades ago. Next to the dagger lay an old, water-stained note, "Return it, before everything begins again." Emily clenched her wrist. For the first time, she felt her hand tremble. She knew then that what she was about to face wasn't just the mystery of a silent child, but the ghost of a history that had never truly ended. That afternoon, sunlight streamed diagonally through the window of the small border town police station. Emily sat in silence before a dusty case file, its cracked leather spine faded to yellow. It wasn't a task meant for a new officer, much less something she was authorized to touch. But the boy's eyes, deep as a chasm, kept circling her thoughts. Then almost instinctively, she reached out and opened the file. The first page had been torn out, as if someone had once tried to erase a piece of the past. But what followed was disturbingly clear. Case number 87 BC. Suspects a reclusive tribal group. Description: undocumented, no official language, non-compliant. A handwritten note added, "Do not engage unless under direct federal order." Emily shuddered. A photograph slipped from between the pages, a man with fierce eyes, long hair tied at the back, and a crescent-shaped scar on his neck, identical to the faint mark she had glimpsed on the boy's nape just days earlier. The picture was faded, backlit against a black backdrop with no date or location. But it wasn't the photo that made Emily rise from her chair, it was the smudged pencil caption scribbled beneath it. "If he returns, do not confront. Offer an apology for us." In that moment, she understood that her life was now entangled in a secret this entire land had long tried to bury. And the boy. He wasn't just an undocumented child. He was a reminder that the past never disappears. It only waits for someone brave enough to unseal it. That night, there was no moon. The forest behind the police station remained a stretch of unnerving stillness, where even a whisper of wind rustling through the leaves could send shivers down one's spine. Emily lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Ever since the boy had arrived, she'd felt something was off. As if everything had shifted slightly out of place, but no one noticed. A faint scratching sound touched the window. Not forceful, not persistent, just light, like someone testing with a fingertip. Emily sat up and moved quietly into the living room. The small house was silent, lit only by the soft glow of a yellow lamp above the stove. But the sofa where the boy had slept every night was empty. She looked around, called his name. No reply. Only a small object on the table, a leather cord necklace with a smooth, teardrop-shaped stone, placed deliberately as if someone had left it there with intention. The front door was ajar. A breeze swept in, carrying the damp scent of earth and something else. Distant. Emily followed the small footprints pressed into the moist soil leading toward the woods, the same woods that had once been cordoned off after an unsolved disappearance in 1998. The trail led her to an old stone pillar covered in moss, where the light was swallowed by mist and shadow. The boy stood there, alone, his back to her. Emily gasped softly and slowed her steps. She meant to call his name, but the words stuck in her throat. The boy didn't turn. He was murmuring something in a language she didn't understand. It sounded like a chant or a summoning. Then he turned around. And for the first time, he spoke in clear English. "They're watching." Emily stood frozen. The words echoed, as if from a place far beyond the woods, beyond the present even. A memory stirred. She recalled the old case file and the ancient symbol found at the scene of the disappearance over 2 decades ago. A symbol no one ever deciphered, and no one ever mentioned again. And now it was back spoken through the first words of a boy with no name, no past. But that night, when Emily looked into his eyes, she knew this was not just a child in need of saving. He was a doorway, one that led straight to what the world had tried for years to keep locked away. Emily had grown used to evenings filled only with the whisper of wind brushing against the shutters and the golden glow cast by her round table lamp. But ever since the Comanche boy had stayed, the house seemed to breathe differently, quietly, expectantly, and always just beyond reach. He slept on the couch in the living room. He never asked for anything, never cried, never called out to anyone. Yet every morning when Emily woke up, her blanket had been neatly adjusted, the water jug refilled, and the stove, though she hadn't touched it, was warm. She called him Rio, not because he said that was his name, but because his eyes held the color of a sunset river drifting through desert land. Each time she tried to start a conversation, he would simply look at her long, steady, and then turn away. Emily didn't take offense. She understood that what the boy carried in his chest wasn't ignorance, but a kind of loss no one had ever taught him how to name. Once, while she was repairing the roof of the horse shed behind the house, she slipped. No one heard her cry out, except the boy. Within 3 minutes, Rio appeared. He said nothing. He simply held out his hand, small but solid as mountain stone. As she sat on the ground, catching her breath and about to thank him, he had already turned away. But beside her, he left something, a worn red cloth, hand-stitched with indigo thread. It smelled of smoke ash and a memory too distant to name. That night, Emily dreamed of fire. Not her own dream, but fire reflected in the boy's eyes as he stood silent at the window. Eyes that didn't cry, but burned. That same night, she opened a drawer to tuck away the cloth and found a strange slip of paper, hidden in the old file code name, Elk Whisper, noted as a participant in a pilot exchange program with indigenous communities. 1999 vanished without explanation. And in that moment, Emily understood the boy in her home wasn't just someone who had been rescued. He was the key to a chapter no one had ever dared to finish writing. That evening, the sunset spilled across the sky like a sheet of slow-burning fabric. Winds howled down from the western canyon, carrying red dust and the brittle crackle of dried grass. Emily had just returned from the town police station when she saw the boy standing at the gate, silent, but no longer alone. Behind Rio stood a man. Tall, his back straight as carved stone, yet his eyes veiled in the haze of someone who had walked through too much loss. No one invited him in, but he stepped into the yard as if he had belonged there long ago. Rio didn't react. He simply stepped back half a pace, as if making room for something greater than himself. The man didn't speak English, but he looked at Emily, touched his fingers to his chest, and uttered a low, ancient sound, tonsa. The syllables were heavy old, like they had been summoned from the earth itself. Rio nodded slightly. Emily felt the air around her thicken, a sensation no academy had ever trained her for. It wasn't part of any protocol or report. It was instinct. This was no chance encounter. The man sat down on the porch steps and opened an old leather pouch. Inside was a hand-drawn map, faded but bearing the same symbol tattooed at the back of Rio's neck. Emily saw it. She asked a question, but no one answered. Instead, the man retrieved a small, smooth black stone, volcanic in appearance, and handed it to her. When she touched it, it was cold, yet beneath the surface pulsed a rhythm, slow and steady. There are things, the man said in a voice somewhere between a whisper and a lullaby, that will never be found in government files. They exist only in memory, and memory must be retold, or it will find a way to rise again. Emily didn't know why she didn't object. She simply sat there beside the boy and the stranger. No questions, no suspicion. Because in that moment she understood some truths aren't solved with logic, they're felt with faith. That night the boy slept in her room. The man didn't stay, but as he left, he pressed his fingers gently against the wall near the window, leaving behind a faint mark, 3 horizontal lines, and a single diagonal slash. Emily didn't understand it, but the boy looked at it and nodded, as if it were a promise. And for the first time since Rio had arrived, he spoke. Not in English, but in his own language. Soft as breath, but enough to make Emily cry without knowing why. The next morning, Emily woke to sunlight soft enough to clearly see the blanket neatly folded at the foot of her bed. Rio was no longer in the room. She sprang up, a thin thread of intuition snapping taut and then breaking. But the boy was still in the yard, sitting quietly beside the cactus patch, holding a letter in his hand. No one knew where it had come from. There was no postmark, no envelope, no return address. Just a piece of ivory-colored paper folded in 4 slipped into the rusted mailbox outside the house. A mailbox Emily had never expected to receive anything through, especially in a place so far removed from any main road. She took it. The paper bore strange symbols, not English, nor the Comanche characters she had seen in books. But at the bottom was a circle inside of which were 3 horizontal lines and a diagonal slash identical to the mark the man had left on her wall. Rio looked at Emily. Not with fear, not with worry, but with the gaze of someone who already knew where they were meant to go. That afternoon, Emily drove out of town, not on assignment, not under orders, but guided by something she couldn't name, like a whisper, pulling at her from the inside, drawing her forward like a thread tied to a memory that was never hers. She stopped at Road 13, an old route erased from maps years ago after a landslide. But there, in a setting that seemed to exist outside meaning, stood a faded wooden sign to whippoorwill's reach. No one at the station had ever heard of the place. It wasn't in any file, not on any digital map. But Rio had pointed the way without hesitation, without doubt. They walked 3 more miles, arriving in a land as still as a dream hidden from the world. No signal, no lights. Only the wind threading through juniper branches, and somewhere a long, faint sound that couldn't be traced. A sound without language, but to anyone who had truly listened, it wasn't an echo, it was a sign. At the heart of the valley, Emily saw a stone circle just like the one drawn in the letter. Rio stepped into it without guidance. He knelt and placed the obsidian stone the man had given him at the center. The ground stirred as if a deep breath had just exhaled from the earth itself. Emily stepped back, not out of fear, but because for the first time she felt she was witnessing something older than any testimony, any verdict, any system she had once believed was just. And as the sky shifted to deep indigo, a woman's voice rose not from anywhere, yet not leaving either. It spoke in a sound no device could capture, only a heart not yet broken could hear. Memory doesn't die. It only waits to be called by its true name. Emily stood there, eyes locked on the stone circle. She knew from that moment on, there was no turning back. When the obsidian stone was placed at the center of the circle, a vivid red light cracked open from the dry earth, thin as a fracture on glass, yet deep enough to reach memories Emily never knew she carried. The wind stopped. The trees stood still as if something unseen held them in place. And in that moment, a fragment of time buried hidden began to come alive. Emily stepped back, her heart beating in sync with a strange pulse rising from the ground. Rio stood unmoving, his eyes unblinking, as if he had either witnessed this before or had once been part of it. In the flickering light rising from the stone, something shimmered like fire, but did not burn. It wavered, and from it images emerged: a small room, rusted metal walls, children locked in iron cages, footsteps echoing down a silent corridor. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't an illusion. Emily knew it was a memory. Someone's memory. Or perhaps the shared memory of many who had survived. A deep, calm voice spoke behind her. It was the same man from before with the wolf-embroidered scarf. He didn't ask questions. He offered no explanation. He simply said, "Some things aren't written in the record not because they're untrue, but because they must not be remembered too soon." He handed Emily an old hand-drawn map, a path leading to a secret Reformation camp hidden deep in the mountains, where the government had once experimented with a method called isolated therapeutic conditioning for children showing signs of heightened emotional response. The terminology was a mask. Inside the camp was a lab for testing control over memory, emotion, and mental connectivity. Emily looked down at the map. A line written in black charcoal ran beneath the sketch. This is where Rio escaped. Alone. She wanted to doubt it. But then she realized Rio never spoke. He didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't tremble, because he had learned to hide everything inside silence, and silence was the only thing the camp could never manipulate. And this boy, throughout all this time, was not a helpless child looking for someone to protect him. He was the sole survivor, leading Emily back so they could find the ones who had not yet been freed. On the maps that had been half burned, the paths leading into the mountain's heart were always blurred, not because someone deliberately tried to hide them, but because some roads only reveal themselves when the one walking them is truly ready to pay the price. Emily walked between cold stone steps, each echo reverberating downward like a warning. If she continued, there would be no turning back. Rio walked ahead, his hand tracing faint carvings along the walls, ancient symbols not found in any formal language. But Emily could feel it. Those rough curves pulsed like the heartbeats of people who had once been imprisoned here. After 3 bends, they reached a large iron door sealed shut with crossed welding marks and a dried blood inscription. "Don't open if you still want to forget." Emily placed her hand on the door. No one was forcing her to open it. There was no order from above, no sense of honor, no reward. Only the look in Rio's eyes within it. She saw something no report had ever mentioned. Someone still alive, still waiting to be brought out of that darkness. The door opened. Inside was a small, damp, dimly lit room where an elderly man sat slumped against the wall. His hair was stark white, his hands bound by rusted copper wire, and beside him lay a notebook open to the final page with one scribbled sentence. "If you still remember, don't let them erase me again." Emily knelt to untie him. The man didn't ask who she was. He simply whispered in a rasping voice, "Emily, is that you?" She froze, her breath caught. "I've never met you," she replied. He gave a faint smile. "I know. But I taught your father how not to surrender." In that moment, every piece of data within her, everything she had been trained to believe, every protocol she followed, collapsed. Emily was no longer the new officer stationed at the border. She was the last thread of a chain of people who had once resisted, a link that was thought to be broken. She didn't report back to headquarters. She didn't call for backup. She simply carried the man out of the tunnel on her back while Rio walked behind, and for the first time he spoke. "Now we still have each other." On the way back to the outpost, dawn began to rise. Light poured over the scattered pebbles that sparkled like gemstones, once stained by blood, but now marking a place where people thought to have vanished were allowed to exist again, even if only in each other's memories. Emily didn't write a report. She simply jotted a single line in her private journal. The truth does not need to be recorded, only not forgotten. Thank you to those who stayed until the very end of this story. There are truths no one asks to be retold, because telling them doesn't change anything. But some still choose to keep them, not to accuse, but to remind each other that sometimes the most righteous thing we can do is not remain silent. Thank you for walking with us to the very last step of this journey. Not everyone has the patience to listen to stories with no clean endings, and even fewer are willing to empathize with those who only live in the shadows and ask us to believe in them, even when they have no name on any map. If this story touched something in you, please don't walk away just yet. Share it not for views, but for one reason alone, because somewhere out there, someone might still be in need of a sliver of light. However small, but just enough to keep them from falling one more time. If you wish to keep walking with stories like this, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single tale of truth, memory, and the people the world once forgot. We'll meet again in another story from another land, where light comes not only from the sun, but from the choices of those still brave enough to walk through darkness. Thank you to the one who remained. And if you can, don't let anyone grow up without knowing they were once saved.